Chapter 11 The Girl Queen. 3 days after she had been crowned the second time before the city hall, Queen Jadwiga was signing documents. First signatures seemingly not of particular importance, but today how venerated. Historians like to point out that the initial act of her reign confirmed the right of a man of the middle class, one Sidel, to certain lands he had bought. The people looked on this as a sign that their young queen would prove herself kin of their great Casimir. The crown was on her head, the scepter in her hand. There could be no hope now of dropping them and riding back to Hungary. At times in the night, she must have dreamed desperately of doing just that. Messages were infrequent. Letters took so long to come and go. What had been happening at Buda this week? To her mother, Mary. What in Vienna was William doing? What was going on in Scribe John's bookshop at Buda? Had her mother perhaps repeated for the young people of the court the excursion to St. Margaret's Island? Or was there no opportunity for diversion during these days, which reports said were increasingly harassing to the Queen Regent? If she could return but for a week, for an hour. Thus she must have questioned and battled. However, on the whole, her will held her, and her natural resiliency kept her vigorous and eager. She must live up to what the Holy Lord and her father expected of her. She must be all ears and eyes, quick and strong. Poland could depend on her, and always the Blessed Virgin and saints would help. Many state matters demanded early action. Those who had done most to help the House of Anjou to the throne must be rewarded, and those who had suffered losses during the Civil War must be compensated. Among other promises given during her journey from Buda to Krakow was that of a gift to the salt mine city of Bochnia, and Jadwiga did not delay to keep her promise. She sent Bochnia money to found a Dominican convent and a church. Thus, in her beginning month as queen, began those works of piety which were to follow one after the other throughout her reign. However, her first serious undertakings were with her own city, spreading below Wawel Hill. There had always been rivalry between the royal hill and the capital. The struggle for dominance had made their mutual history one of conflict and reconciliation. She had no responsibility more important than that of maintaining the delicate balance of peace between hill and town. The era of privileges following the granting of the Krakow Charter in 1257 had bred in its burghers a lusty courage. German merchants, descended from those who came to rebuild the capital after the Mongolian invasion of 1241, had destroyed practically everything but the Wawel buildings and St. Andrew's Church, were rich and powerful. They enjoyed the benefits of the Magdeburg municipal law introduced by way of Breslau, and treasured its advantages as symbolizing their independence. At times, wealthy town leaders gave tournaments and banquets to foreign ambassadors and other princely visitors at court, which threatened to eclipse those of the Wawel itself. Jadwiga's uncle, King Casimir, had had a particularly tempestuous experience with these unruly subjects. But finally, after disciplining them in various ways, Casimir had in a gesture of forgiveness made one of them his royal counselor, a post hitherto awarded only to a knight. And after agreeing that the city should have the revenues from the public scales, its small gold and silver smelting works, and house rents, he made other adjustments and reassumed working relations with his townspeople. As Jadwiga began her rule, conditions were promising. Her father, King Louis, had always treated Krakowians generously, and they expected equal kindness from his daughter. She spoke German, which made her seem not a stranger to the controlling German group. German was the language of business, though within the city walls was a jargon of tongues. The large Italian element, too, felt that because of her father she would be sympathetic toward them. Italians were everywhere. One directed the mint, another the Bochnia salt mines from which the crown drew vital revenues. They worked in gold and silver, made hair ornaments, decorated hats and helmets with ostrich and heron's feathers. Then her own Hungarian group had received her with unbounded enthusiasm. They were certain of her favor. How picturesque the multicolored activity of the trade organizations inhabiting the bannered towers of the guilds. They poured their useful wares and luxuries into the yearly trade market and sent them to the fairs at Gniezno and Poznan, Lublin and Lvov. Jadwiga knew that her success would depend largely on the prosperity of these guilds. Great north-south and east-west trade routes converged upon them and then spread away again. She had followed one of them in coming to her new home. There were indeed 4 roads to Hungary. Ever northward along the Buda, Kassa, Sandek, Krakow line rolled wagons heavily freighted with copper, lead, iron, oil. While others returned to Hungary and the south with salt and furs, stuffs from Krakow and Silesia, and yet more cloth, and tin and silver and wax and paper and amber from Germany and England. Or they might bear fruit and wines and fish arrived via Danzig or from Flanders, or manuscripts and paintings and tapestries. It is not difficult to understand why in this century men struggled for control of the Baltic. Polish merchants competing for foreign trade used constantly the Vistula River and the land route over Thorn to the coast. The stream was dark with barges piled high with wood, worked and unworked. Once traders arrived at the Baltic, they could reach such great exchange centers as Bruges and Wisby and London easily by boat. Crossing these north-south lines ran the road to eastern Lvov, city of the Lion, and farther north the one over Lublin to Belz or Vladimir, whence all Lithuania and Russia lay open. More than the usual perils of trade routes lurked on such roads. The whitening bones of many an intrepid adventurer marked their bandit-infested courses. The ultimate objectives of many caravans which stopped at Krakow were the order's wealthy strongholds at Marienburg and Königsberg. Indeed, Jadwiga's royal secretaries were kept busy writing replies to the knights, complaints of Krakow's obstruction of their trade through customs duties and detentions of one sort or another. The young queen welcomed, from her visitors, descriptions of Bruges, romantically beautiful city of Flanders, and of nearer Danzig, the Venice of the Baltic, whose enormous warehouses and merchant palaces with gilded painted facades and wide stone street terraces and balustrades made it a city of splendor and dream. She herself would have liked to visit Danzig. Could she, now queen? From Krakow, a road led also to Silesia, to Breslau, her commercial rival. This was inevitably a dangerous road. And from there, turning southward, reached Prague, where Krakow merchants were allowed to trade by a special privilege granted only a half-dozen years before her coronation. Following this agreement, the Krakow mint had begun to issue money like that of Prague, with the groschen as the small coin. Jadwiga remembered that her father had paid much attention to the designs of his coins, and she hoped to make those of her own reign beautiful. Each day brought new interest or knowledge which helped to outline the path she wished to follow. For although the will of the most powerful men of the kingdom focused upon her, Queen Jadwiga's own will was by no means neutralized. Blood of Piusts and Anjous flowed in her veins. Controlling powers might shape the framework of her days, but within it, young as she was, she found opportunities to initiate and direct. As the crowded months passed, she seemed rapidly growing to the stature of queen. She had already caught the popular fancy so completely that her people saw her not merely as a young girl set above them on the throne, but as a being exalted in character and wisdom. They remarked how often and how long she was on her knees in the royal chapel, seeking counsel and support in prayer. The royal passageway connecting the castle with the cathedral knew her well. It seemed strange to have much older women looking to her for direction, approval. Yet she was their queen, and with her investment, age had somehow dropped its mantle on her young shoulders. But while she led, she followed too, depending most for advice and support on such experienced persons as the wives of the governors of her provinces. Among them, one of her especial friends was dark-haired, blue-eyed Catherine, wife of the governor of eastern Lvov, which faced the great Ukraine country. but the one to whom she turned oftenest in her need for friendship was the friend of Hungarian days, Elizabeth. Her husband, Spitko, governor of Krakow, was as young in spirit as his wife, so that in this couple the queen found friends sharing her own interests and enthusiasms. Any wife of Spitko would have been near to her, but there was vastly more in the relationship between herself and Elizabeth. From the chain of their common experience vibrated harmonies of deep understanding. Spitko and Elizabeth were not wealthy, but they belonged to the most cultivated Polish group of the capital, and whenever they came to Wawel Castle, these influential, happy young people brought to their queen new thoughts and contacts with life on her outside the court. The queen could not, after all, live on her ideals. Devotion to duty, to affairs of state and church, could not completely fill her days. More and more she depended on those hours, when forgetting that they were queen and governor's wife. She and Elizabeth were in thought again together at Visegrad or Buda, with her mother and Mary and William. Often she felt that without Elizabeth, for whom such memories were dear and familiar, without this friend to whom she could pour out her heart, she could not have borne her separation. Young as she was, Jadwiga began early to try to improve the manners and tone of her court. She was quick to encourage good conduct, following her father's democratic inclination. She added to her circle certain daughters of burghers, choosing them for their merit. In the beginning, there was some grumbling over the rigor of her standards, but love and admiration for her won. Nor did her seriousness of purpose banish gaiety. Her own healthy enjoyment of amusements encouraged it in others. Since for her, music was a necessity, it was fortunate that Poles valued this art as highly as did her own Hungarians. Not less than 28 instruments were known to them, the most popular being the trumpet and flute. To a Pole, no emotion seemed to flower fully until it had found expression in music. The race that would give birth to Chopin and Paderewski already gave promise of that preeminence. We can, then, think of Jadwiga as keeping a large court orchestra busy, and in the evening, after the many chapel services were over, see one after another of her maidens, flower-crowned and lute in hand, take her place on the bench pulled out into the middle of the royal hall to entertain her with worldly songs. Always generous in praise, she often drew a blushing girl to her, and perhaps teasingly embarrassed her further. But where rides the knight without peer who fires these cheeks and kindles these notes? On occasions when they, in turn, begged for a Hungarian song, she sang for them those loved at Buda. Yes, healthy gaiety was the witness of a sound court, but not idleness. There was more to be done than arrange the hair and coax the complexion, although some women had as many as 300 pots of creams and perfumes. With so many chalices to cover and altars to ornament, needles must fly. Jadwiga interested herself in the decoration, not only the altar of the royal chapel, but in embellishing the high altar of the cathedral, and those of increasingly numerous other churches. As soon as she arrived, she had begun to embroider cloths and vestments, and to encourage the women of her court to do similar work. In this initial year, her own efforts were concentrated chiefly on magnificent silk rationale, today a treasure in Wawel Cathedral, a sacred vestment a little like the vertical ribbons on the Roman tunic. Using gold threads twice twisted, she embroidered on the white silk in seed pearls the cross and the symbol of the Anjous. A pious monk has since counted the seed pearls she used, 42,000. As on Visegrad Hill, hospitality on Wawel Hill was unstinted. The castle was a favorite objective not only for neighbor rulers, but for cultivated and romantically minded travelers from all over Europe. Casimir, and later, Jadwiga's pleasure-loving grandmother, Elizabeth, had swung its doors wide open. The little queen kept them so. The royal programs here, as in Hungary, moved forward to an accompaniment of great crowds. If Jadwiga herself went away to visit, she might be escorted by as many as 2,000 or 3,000 knights. Visitors were entertained with magnificent banquets and spectacles. The guest who came for dinner at 2 o'clock was apt to stay on for supper. so the palace housekeeping was a formidable business. Fortunately, the old accounts are still preserved, and as we hold them in our hands and turn their mellow pages on which the neat notations seem as clear as on the day they were set down, Jadwiga and her court are very near. But though Jadwiga seemed constantly to be entertaining guests, presiding over banquets and tournaments, receiving foreign ambassador or papal envoy, or sitting with the royal council, she was also doing much hard work of another kind. Daily she was going to school, to church and state. The council of the crown and special teachers saw to the latter lessons. The priests directed those of the church. All found that they had an unusual mind to deal with, keen, intuitive, and at the same time, logical. And, for her age, astonishingly furnished. She surprised her new directors with her knowledge of history and politics. They were especially impressed to find this young girl, already so accomplished a theologian, delighting in the sermons of the fathers and the lives of the saints. The fearless speeches and deeds of St. Bridget of Sweden and St. Catherine of Siena fired her with a burning desire to do as well. She was later to have certain of their utterances translated into Polish, so that her people could follow them at first hand. The good tidings of her concern for her least subject, of her tender-heartedness, ran across the country. Scarcely a day but some sufferer appealed to her charity, and never in vain. She was not content, even in these early months, merely to endow altars and hospitals. She tried to give direct personal service. Stories show her talking with the aged, reaching out her hand to the poor, lifting the sick child. Pity welled from her lonely heart. No one worked harder than the Girl Queen. For rest after a full relief program or a tiring council meeting, we can think of her as going outside to the garden where, as she sat under one of its great trees, among birds and flowers, her thoughts hurried to Buddha.